Our first step is going to set up a heartbeat network. So we went into ESX, we're going into networking, we're creating a heartbeat network, we're putting it to our internal network so it's a non-routable, and now we have a heartbeat network available in ESX. Then we're going to assign that to a new NIC on each of our virtual machines. So we're going to add another NIC, select the heartbeat network, and repeat the process on REMIS also. Once we have that second NIC, we'll go to the server. We're going to go into our IP settings. We're going to rename that, go into the properties, go turn off IPv6. Configure the IPv4. Since it's a heartbeat network, we only need an IP address and a subnet mask. We do not actually need any other information. So we're going to use a 172 range for this. We're using a 192 for everything else, and a /24 for the subnet. And we're going to rename the NIC to heartbeat just to make it easier for troubleshooting which NIC is doing what. And we'll go over to Saturn and we'll do the same thing. Click on the NICs, right click, go to rename heartbeat network. And we're going to go and configure it, turn off IPv6, go into IPv4, go into properties. We're giving it a 172, and then we're using the same last octet as what the primary NIC is, just to keep things easier to remember. Now that we have our NICs on our private network, we need to set up our storage on Jupyter. So on Jupyter, we're going to go to settings, we're going to add a disk, and we're going to take the defaults for 40 gigs. We're going to allocate all of the disk space now because we are going to be building a database on it. And we'll click finish. Okay, so now we have an additional disk available to our server. Now we need to go into Disk Manager. And we'll right click, online the disk, right click again, initialize, and we'll use MBR, which is the default, right click, new simple volume. And we're going to give the volume a name. Actually, sorry. Here we're going in to add the ISCSI target role. And scroll down, ISCSI target, select next, install. It'll take just a little bit to install the role. As the ISCSI installer completes, we're going to go into file storage, go into ISCSI, and tasks, new ISCSI virtual disk. And we're going to select our extra drive we had added, which in our case was an E. We're going to give it a name, select next. We're going to give a size, we're going to take the default, and since there's a little overhead, it's 39.9 gigs. Giving it our name. Then we're going to add the servers that are going to need to connect to it, so we need to put those in by IP address. So that'll be the IP address of REMIS and the IP address of Saturn. Now that we have both the servers that are going to connect to it listed, select Next. We aren't going to do any additional security, so now we'll create our ISCSI disks and our target. And then what we're going to need to do is carve out a second disk. So we're going to carve it out of the same drive. And this one we're going to make 10 gigs, where the first one was 5 gigs. And these will be the two drives that we'll be working with as we build our cluster. And then create. And we'll be adding that to the same target we created earlier. Okay, so on Remus, we went to Tools, ISCSI Initiator. And then we're going to point it to our target, which is Jupyter. And then we're going to do a quick connect. And then it shows that we connected. And we're going to go to Add Volumes and Devices. We should see 2 drive mountings come across. Select OK. And then we need to go over to Saturn. We're going to do the exact same thing. Did get a warning saying ISCSI service hasn't been started. And we just say, yes, we know we want to start it. Putting in IP address of Jupyter. Doing our quick connect. Doing auto configure on volumes and devices. Now we're going to go into Disk Manager, and in Disk Manager we're going to go in and right click on the drive, online, right click again, initialize, disk 1 MBR, select OK. Then we're going to right click on the actual drive, new simple volume, next, next, next. We're going to give it a name. Next, finish. And then we're going to go over to our other server. So we're going to go over to Remus, and we're going to go into Disk Management also. So right click, Disk Manager, right click, and we're just going to online the disk. And it throws an error initially, which is okay because we just need to go to Action, Rescan Disks, because we had made a change on the other one that it didn't know about yet. Now we can online the disk. Disk comes through, it's already formatted, and it's being recognized by both servers. So both servers are sharing that same disk. Now we're ready to start building a cluster. So we're going to add a role. Next, 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 next. And it's actually a feature. So it's on the next window, and we're going to go down and failover clustering, add feature, next, and install. And we're doing this on Saturn. And it takes a little while for the install to run through. While that's going through, we're going to do the same thing over on Remus. So next, next, and we're going to select failover clustering, add features, next, install, and we're back on Saturn. Once that finishes, we can click close, wait till it finishes on Remus. Once that closes, then on Remus we can go into failover cluster manager. In failover cluster manager, we're going to validate our cluster. So first thing it's going to ask us when we go into validate cluster is it's going to say who are the nodes that are part of this cluster. So we're going to put in Remus, add, and then we're going to do Saturn and add Saturn as well. So those are 2 nodes that are going to be making up our cluster. And next. And then we're going to run all tests, next, and next. And it's going to take a while to run, and what we're looking for is everything to come back green. Now, as the before you begin, we're going to give our cluster a name. And then we're going to assign an IP address for the cluster itself, because the cluster lives outside of the actual physical servers. It's like a virtual server laid across the top of the two servers. And next. And the part about the storage there, we're going to deselect for our case here, because we don't want it to automatically add all storage that it can find. And then we're going to select Finish. And it goes through and builds out our cluster. And now that our cluster is built, we need to add storage so that we can actually define our witness disk. So we're going to go into Disks, add a disk. So it'll be our 5 gig drive. And we're going to right click on our cluster. And we're going to say More Actions. And top one. We're going to select that. And we're going to define the quorum settings. So, and configure disk witness. And next. Select the disk that we want to associate with it. Select next. And finish. So our quorum disk is actually defined now. So now if we go over into disks, we'll see that the witness disk is defined on our primary disks. Now we're going back over to Remus, going into settings, and we're going to change the ISO that's being pointed to by the DVD drive to the SQL ISO. We're going to run setup. And this is the SQL Server setup disk that's installing. And now it's going to give us our options. We're going to go into advanced. And then we want to go into advanced cluster preparation. And again, we're doing this on Remus. So we're going to next set the license terms. Next. We're going to not run a software update at this point. Then we're going to select Database Engine Service, and it comes with a couple other defaults. And we're going to select the default named instance, and next. And then now we need to actually go to Mars in order to do the next step. So what we're going to need to do is launch our tool for making managed service accounts. So we're going to go New. First one is going to be SQL Agent. Then we'll select OK. And we ran into an error because we hadn't run our PowerShell script yet to build our root key. So we'll do that really quick. This particular script is one that you only do on a test box because it does force it to happen right away. Normally you won't use the back end of that script, so it'll take 10 hours to apply this before you can actually move forward. For our case, we're going to just drop this in right away so we can use it right now. And then we're done with PowerShell. Now we can go back to the managed service account, and we created our managed service account. Then you need to apply your managed service account to what servers it can be used on. And so in our case, we want that managed service account to be on Remus and Saturn. And OK. Successfully created. And then we need to create another one, so we're going to go New again. This one's going to be called SQL Executive. And OK. Let's created successfully, and then we need to associate that also with Remus and Saturn. And OK. So now our group accounts have been successfully created for both Saturn and Remus. We have SQL Agent and SQL Executive. Now we can go back over to Remus, and we're going to actually apply those. So it's going to be the domain first. In our case, domain is Trantor, / SQL Agent, and then a $sign because we were using those group managed service accounts. No password. And then we're going to go down to the SQL Server database engine, and that's going to be Trantor / SQL Executive $sign. Also no password. We aren't going to change the startup types on any of the services. Select Next and install. And so this is running a one-way pre-flight. That once you start it, if it does go haywire, you are sort of stuck and would need to revert back to a snapshot. While that's running, we're going to bring in our other disk. So also on Remus, we go into Disk Management. We're going to right-click on Disk 2. We're going to select OK to online it and then initialize it. Then we're going to format it. New simple disk. Next, next, next. Give it a name. And this is where we're going to be putting our SQL install files. And so now that is set up. So now we have somewhere to install SQL when we're ready to do it. Now we're going to go back over to Saturn. And on Saturn, we're going into Tools, Failover Cluster Manager. And then we're going to go into Disk Management. Disk Management, we're going to go down to Disk 2. We're going to online it. And it's going to give us a warning because we made a change, but we didn't actually first refresh. So we need to go to Action, Rescan Disk. Now we're going to be able to online the disk. And it comes through and it's all formatted and ready to go. So then on Saturn, we're going to add a drive in the disks. So we're going to bring in drive 2. And so drive 2 is now showing as online on Saturn. Then we're going to go back to Remus, and we're just waiting for the installer to finish. And it's finishing up. Installation was successful. Close. Go to Saturn. And we're going to switch. So on Saturn, we have the ISO also. We also need to do the pre-flight on Saturn. Because what this is doing is setting all of the SQL parameters necessary for each of the nodes to be a SQL server for the cluster. So we're going to do startup. And again, we're going to go into advanced. And we're going to do advanced cluster preparation. Next. Accept. Next. Next. Database engine services. Next. Select the default, so next. And this is where we put domain, so Trantor / SQL Agent $sign. And then for the database engine, Trantor / SQL Executive $sign. we're taking the defaults. Install. Take a little while to run. Once you get green across the boards, you can close. Now we're going to do the advanced, and we're going to actually do the install. And so this is actually building the cluster now. So this will build the SQL cluster on top of the Windows cluster. Getting the one warning we have is normal. Here we're going to give our cluster its name. SQL-FCI. And then down below you can see the nodes that are associated with it, Saturn and Remus. Next. Okay, these warnings are normal. We expect that. And here's where we only should be seeing cluster disk 2. We should not be seeing cluster disk 1, and that is where SQL will be installed. This one we're going to select IPv4, put the IP address of our SQL cluster in. In our case it's going to be 192.168.79.201. Everything else will leave. And next. And we're going to add the current user, and we're going to select mixed mode and put in a password for our SA account. And then we'll hit install. And what we're looking for is green across the board. Installation successful. We can close that. And we can go into, close disk manager, go into failover cluster manager, and then if we go under roles, we are now going to see the SQL Server cluster role showing up. And it is in a clustered environment. Last but not least, we're going to go back to Jupyter. And we're going to open SQL Server Management Studio. And in SQL Server Management Studio, we're going to log into the cluster IP, which is our 201, so 192.168.79.201 using Windows Authentication. And now we are logging into our cluster. And we have successfully built a Windows SQL Server 2017 cluster on top of Windows 2016.